This is DNC Whistleblower Heather Morgan with another part of my victims' impact statement. I have to do these statements in 15-minute or less segments because YouTube doesn't let you upload anything larger than 15 minutes. I believe there are people who upload 2.5 hour, 3 hour videos to YouTube, but I'm not sure how to do that. And it's actually because I'm giving so much information that needs to be vetted. I'm just doing it in 15-minute sections so that it's easier for everyone to just look at each segment, take whatever notes they need to take, do their vetting, and then go back and listen to another statement at their leisure. So what I want to talk about in this statement is the DEA drug diversion by the doctors that is being enabled by Byron Brown, his friend Cuomo, and Letitia James, the people at the DNC, and the Republicans as well. The Republicans in Florida, they've always been a red state. Republicans in Arizona, that's pretty much a red state. They have enabled the crimes against me, and what we're finding out is these fraud schemes that got Byron Brown's office raided is nationwide. I can promise you that there are probably lots of mayors, and I know there are county people in Missouri that I recorded, judges, commissioners, all of whom are enabling this stuff because they all own stock in these businesses that are defrauding the taxpayers and the insurance companies and you know, all of these other entities. And so the more money the businesses make, the more their stock portfolio, you know, increases in value. So but I've already gone into that, you know, in previous videos. So what I want to focus on right now is a very ugly public health and criminal aspect of this is the DEA drug diversion by the doctors that's being enabled by these public officials, and especially Byron Brown. Besides the Me Too scandal and the rape and the sexual assault and the public relations issues, when these, and this is, and I'm going to be quoting two DEA drug diversion specialists, one in St. Louis and one in Kansas City. The first one I spoke to was Scott Collier, who was, or Collier, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. He was the DEA drug diversion supervisor who did oversight on doctors in St. Louis in May of 2014. And I recorded him telling me to write all of the doctors up who are participating in the falsification of medical records, and those who were writing for the narcotics in denying me cancer treatment, and that kept me in pain and constantly in need of because it's a basic human right. You are entitled to pain management, especially for a legitimate pain source like cancer. I mean, addicts addicts are allowed to take Suboxone and methadone to keep them out of pain. So when they're detoxing, they're not, you know, sick and in pain and everything else. So if they're entitled to, you know, they're casting all these aspersions and making, so, oh, she's just an addict. Well, why are you prescribing her narcotics if you're calling her an addict? But they're using all of this Jim Crow hate rhetoric that goes along with the crime bill of '94, written by Biden and friends. It was passed by Bill Clinton. So, you know, and we're saying if it's okay, and I have no problem with addicts getting whatever they need to help them get off drugs. I have no problem with that at all. What I'm saying is, if you are entitled to pain management when you're coming off of heroin or whatever drug, it's obvious a cancer patient is entitled to pain management. So what the DEA is saying is it's also the the doctor's responsibility. They don't get to falsify medical records when writing for narcotics under any circumstances. He said, why are they falsifying the medical records? I said, number one, because they knew I had cancer, didn't tell me. I said, Dr. Stephen Scott at BJC Healthcare's Boone Hospital Center saw a tumor and got recorded lying, coming into the room and telling me that the ultrasound showed nothing. I just had a couple of eggs stuck, and told me to go back to Arizona for care. I said 2 days prior to that, 2 different appointments in a row at Green Meadows, which is now called South Providence Family Medicine, which is an MU, University of Missouri teaching facility, got recorded refusing to order an ultrasound or do a proper workup after I had been seen in Boone's ER on a Sunday. He wanted an ultrasound, but he didn't have an ultrasound tech because it was a Sunday. He said, you've got to see GYN immediately. And I was bleeding so bad, he gave me fluids because I was severely dehydrated from the bleeding. And he gave me something for pain. And I followed up the next day at their teaching facility, Green Meadows, which is now South Providence Family Medicine. And basically what I recorded out of that doctor was her saying, well, I think it's a pelvic floor issue, and I'm not going to order an ultrasound, but since he wrote a prescription for an ultrasound, you're welcome to take that to a clinic and pay for an ultrasound if you want to, but I'm not going to order it because I'm saying it's pelvic floor. And when I went back and looked at her records a year later, and that's what prompted the call to the DEA, was that she deliberately falsified a lot of the information in that in my medical records to justify that referral to a pelvic floor clinic, which was patient farming. It's kickbacks fraud. A new pelvic floor clinic had opened, and a new student just graduated from MU, and she opened up a pelvic floor clinic, and she needed billable hours. So what they were doing was they were falsifying records, my records, lying to me, and not doing a proper cancer screening to justify sending me to that pelvic floor clinic. And I said, you're a student and you're going to sit here and tell me that your word is more valuable than a veteran ER doctor who just gave me fluids and narcotics. And you're going to tell me you're not going to order the ultrasound. But if you look at those notes, she documented that she tried to get me to go to an ultrasound and I refused. Well, I didn't know that. She had put that in there at the time. But see, she saw me on an emergency basis. She says, you need to go. She says, I'm not going to manage your pain. She said, that's not for me. I'm just here to do an emergency evaluation on the bleeding. And ultimately what she did is refuse to do an emergency proper evaluation on the cause of the bleeding. She says, you need to follow up with your primary care doctor. They'll go out and make you an appointment with a primary care doctor. And they did it, and it was 2 days later. It was on the 16th. I saw Dr. Chu, I think it was. And then some other lady got recorded coming in there. Her name was Hannah Gavari. Basically, the whole exam was just a violent, nasty, accusatory tone. And she didn't even do a physical exam. She didn't listen to my heart. She didn't listen to my lungs. It was a negotiation of how many narcotics she was going to write for. She didn't do an evaluation of the bleeding. She didn't ask me really why she didn't give me a chance to tell her what the source of the pain was, where all of the pain was. I did mention it was in my back, and I was told at the time that it was a back issue. And it wasn't. It was the uterus was swelling up and encroaching on that nerve back there, and there was actually visible uterine swelling. But she didn't mention it because she didn't do a physical exam to see it. Neither did the previous doctor. We got into a screaming match, and I'm like, I'm working. I was actually working as a political fundraiser for the Democratic Congressional Committee and the Democratic Senatorial Committee. I was, and Emily's List and all these big Democrat campaign committees. And I was making at some point $26 an hour, and I wanted to work. And plus I was in a homeless shelter, so I had to leave at 7:30 in the morning. I was on my feet all day. Couldn't come back to the shelter till 7:30 at night. And while I wasn't actually at the call center where I raised donations for the Democrats, I was at the library researching all these political stuff, because when you get on a phone with a political donor, you better know your stuff. So I was working 12 hours a day, roughly. And I said, I wasn't demanding 180 narcotics. She said she was going to write for 30, and I said, you need to give me permission to take them up to 6 times a day if I need to. But I never said anything about demanding 180 narcotics. And what's more, I had my medication with me from the previous prescription. I hadn't even filled that narcotic prescription from the ER doctor yet. If I was an addict, I would have filled that, and all those pills would have been gone, and I would have been looking for more. They knew I was nowhere. I was staying in a homeless shelter that took your medication and locked it up and dispensed it to you when you needed it. And on staff at that shelter was an attorney named Ruth O'Neill. They knew I wasn't abusing my medication. And the other homeless shelter staff was Rachel Kroll. She's the one that told me to go to Gavari in the first place, because it was her doctor. And that's what really started this whole mess. Once Rachel Kroll found out I recorded all that abusive behavior, and that I could prove they falsified those records, they kicked me out of the homeless shelter under false pretenses. And I recorded all of it, even though Ruth O'Neill had made sure I got a referral to Family Health Center. So, they basically, what Gavari got recorded doing was, she in her notes said that I was refusing to, demanded 180 tramadol. And basically, they tried to make it look like I was just demanding narcotics and refusing to get a proper evaluation for the bleeding and everything else. And what I require, what doctor writes for narcotics and doesn't put you up on the exam table and do an exam? I never had a doctor do that, ever. So they had no intentions of getting me treated for cancer. They were intending on sending me to that pelvic floor clinic to get that doctor billable hours. And the thing of it is, I didn't have insurance. What I also realized when I went back and looked at the records, that they were putting in false, just creating false evidence of delusions and schizophrenia, because in the future, they were going to try to get me SSI benefits, because you can't get Missouri Medicaid unless you have SSI benefits, and the only disability they can falsify, that they can manufacture false evidence, is, of course, addiction and psych. So I went over this with the DEA drug diversion supervisor in St. Louis, and he said, so they're falsifying their medical records and lying about your medical condition while writing for narcotics to hide their avoidable medical error? I said, that too. I said, I think there's a lot more going on than that, but yeah. He said they can't do that either. He said when they write for narcotics, number one, they have to be honest with the patient about what's causing the pain, and in my case it was cancer. He said, number two, they have to treat you. If you've got cancer, they got to treat you for that cancer. It doesn't matter whether you have insurance or not. And, we're making this big deal about Medicaid for all and universal health care. Most of these huge health systems, like BJC Healthcare, University of Missouri, Family Health Center of Boone County, Mayo Clinic, most of Catholic Health's hospitals, Banner is a $15 billion a year tax-exempt nonprofit. What they're telling the IRS in exchange for tax exemption is, since we have EMTALA and COBRA laws and all the other laws that demand that we treat people who aren't insured, don't tax us, and we'll use that untaxed revenue to pay for their care. And that's not what's happening. That's another reason why the IRS was involved. Besides, the OIG, because it involves cops politicians, all these oversight people that are basically committing federal violations. And I got to stop here. I'll finish up with the next video.